Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the press, colleagues. We're here this morning to wrap up our meetings, our series of meetings with respect to the International Monetary Fund as part of the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program. This particular review, which is the second as part of the extended fund facility, has also been accompanied by the Article 4 consultation, and therefore at this particular point in time I want to introduce the mission chief, who would give a few remarks with respect to the concluding statement, and then thereafter we'll have a discussion if you care to engage on that. Okay, so thank you very much. Bert?
Thank you, Minister. Thank you to the media for joining us this morning. So I have a brief statement that I'll make to kick off. Barbados continues to make good progress in implementing its ambitious economic reform program, the homegrown BERT program, which aims to restore macroeconomic stability, debt stability, increase international reserves, and raise growth. International reserves, which reached a low of $220 million in May of 2018, have recovered to more than $600 million. And the agreement reached last month in October 2019 between the Government of Barbados and the External Creditor Committee reduces debt and uncertainty. The terms agreed with the international creditors will bring about an immediate reduction in public debt, given the 25% haircut on principal, and will also support further debt reduction going forward with lower interest rates. The terms agreed for the new instrument will help Barbados reach its medium-term target of 80% debt to GDP by 2027-28 and 60% debt to GDP by 2033-34. And by reducing uncertainty, we believe that the completion of the external debt restructuring will help improve prospects for investment. The fiscal adjustment under the BERT program is proceeding as programmed, with the authorities targeting a 6% of GDP primary surplus for this fiscal year, 2019-2020. Full-year effects of reforms set in motion during the last fiscal year, 2018-2019, including the introduction of several new taxes, are supporting this effort. And the budget that was approved earlier this year for this fiscal year, 2019-20, provides, in our view, a solid basis for the targeted fiscal consolidation. Now, reducing transfers to state-owned enterprises is key for sustainable fiscal consolidation. At close to 8% of GDP in fiscal year 2017-18, these transfers had become a significant burden on the budget and a major contributor to fiscal risks. Under the BERT program, these transfers to SOEs are targeted to decline by a combination of much stronger oversight of state-owned enterprises, cost reduction, revenue enhancement, combined with investments to improve services delivered by state-owned enterprises, and also mergers and divestment. On monetary policy, following several years with very high monetary financing, the Central Bank of Barbados now provides liquidity to the government only to smooth unforeseen developments in revenue and spending. A new CBB law will clarify the mandate of the central bank, enhance the decision-making structures of the bank, and introduce safeguards to protect institutional and functional autonomy of the central bank. And work on this law is well underway. Meanwhile, the financial sector remains sound, despite the impact of the domestic debt restructuring that was completed last year, and depository corporations are in general well capitalized and liquid. Structural reform is necessary to unlock Barbados' growth potential. In this area, the authorities have started to address the challenges related to the business climate with a number of initiatives, and I would like to mention here the reform of the town and country planning law. That is an important step to make it easier to provide construction permits. But I think we all agree that there is plenty of scope for further improvement in this area, for further improving the business climate, including by reforming the customs administration to facilitate trading across borders, and, for example, also streamlining the process for setting up new enterprises. Improving the resilience to natural disasters and climate change will help strengthen the outlook. Given limited fiscal space, low fiscal buffers, it is important to make good use of available contingent financing and insurance options. And one of these is the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, under which Barbados insures itself against risks of natural disasters. But there are many other things that can be done as well. For example, with the inclusion of natural disaster clauses into the new domestic and external debt instruments, the government of Barbados has very effectively, in our view, used this debt restructuring to strengthen Barbados' protection against natural disasters. Finally, to sum up, the authorities' BIRD program that we support with our extended fund facility is on track. All program targets for end September 2019 under the program have been met. And what is particularly important is that the target for a primary surplus was met with a comfortable margin, and that gives confidence that the target for the full year, the 6% primary surplus target under the program, can also be met come March of next year. Barbadian authorities also continue to make good progress in implementing structural benchmarks under the program, and hence, after very good discussions this week, the IMF team and the Barbadian authorities have reached staff-level agreement on the completion of the second review under this extended fund facility. This agreement is still subject to approval by the IMF's executive board, which is expected to consider the review in December. And upon the completion of it, the next tranche under the program would be disbursed, which would be about 48 million US dollars, leading to total disbursements of just under 150 million US dollars. And that's my opening statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bert. Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to, at this stage, indicate that whilst the government has been working to create a space to allow the recovery to take root, we are very conscious that the process through which we continue to engage Barbadians and all the stakeholders as part of this initiative is critical. And we have remained committed to not just looking at the macro picture, but essentially ensuring that the implementation of the reforms actually reaches the people as quickly as we can allow that to happen. And just as we have just concluded the first year in the sense of the program, that we continue to see rising levels of confidence within the local economy. We have commenced the repayment of a substantial amount of arrears for not just tax refunds, but also goods and services that were supplied and built up over the last few years to the government, which remain unpaid, as well as national insurance contributions for public servants, which also remain unpaid as part of the financial mess that we inherited. And therefore, the focus on us being able to run these surpluses is, in a sense, to allow us to pay down substantially a lot of those arrears that would have been built up in the past. But then it allows us the opportunity to actually respond to a lot of the social needs that are clearly confronting the country. We've had to make some adjustments with respect to the state-owned enterprises as it relates to certainly sanitation, with respect to how that is financed in order to purchase garbage trucks. And whilst we continue to meet our quantitative targets, we are very conscious that there are still remedies with respect to a lot of the social conditions which this space allows the government the opportunity to respond to. And so our focus, yes, is on meeting the quantitative targets, and we have done so successfully. This now allows for the government through the interaction with the other state-owned enterprises, to be able to help improve the quality and the delivery of services that the public should anticipate from its government as it relates to any taxes or fees that will be introduced, such that the confidence in government will be returned, so that citizens will be aware that it has a government that is there to represent their interests. These are challenging times, and we have committed ourselves to certainly utilizing as much of the technical assistance provided by the fund as well as the World Bank and other entities, because as we go through this transformation part of the economy and the modernization of the economy, we really do need all hands on deck in order to be able to do that. And I will, as I said at CARTAC steering committee meeting yesterday morning, the focus is really on implementation. As quickly as we can get stuff implemented such that the ordinary citizen can see the benefits of the reforms in a very tangible way. And so whilst a lot of what we have been doing on the macro side may not necessarily resonate with the average citizen, the improvement in the quality of public services and the reforms that we continue to engage the stakeholders to implement, I urge Barbadians to stay the course, as the Prime Minister would say, because the sooner we can implement and accelerate the reforms within the context of Barbados, notwithstanding the geopolitical tensions that are continuing to provide some headwinds, the reality is that the economy, the country becomes a little more competitive. We can get growth that much sooner, such that the average citizen can feel as if they're being included in the recovery. And I really want to certainly again thank the fund for hosting its regional conference here last week, because as part of that effort, regional transformation is critical as a collaborative effort to allow the single market and economy to also provide some of that space, because naturally we do a lot of trade across the region. It's perhaps not well known, certainly to the average citizen, but the reality is that the single market and economy provides an avenue through which Barbados and the economies of the region can build that resilience that we want to see within the economies across the region. And it is critical that we accelerate that regional transformation in as much as we are doing our own internal transformation in Barbados to be able to truly bring the benefits that we know can the citizens, not just of Barbados, but certainly of the region, that they can see and feel, simply because we are doing things better, we are as nimble as we are required to be, and we just remove those obstacles that have been confronting us for some time. And that simply means doing things differently, such that we can reallocate our resources as efficiently as we can. And so the simple message this morning is that the government of Barbados is committed to the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program. We are committed to ensuring that the reforms are implemented in such a manner that the growth and the recovery that is to come is as inclusive as possible. And therefore, we are asking the citizens and all the stakeholders across the country, in a sense, to let us accelerate the implementation of the reforms as quickly as possible. You spoke about customs, for example, in your presentation, and I want to just say a few things on that at this point. The reality is that we were the last country in the region to upgrade to Assecuda World. And what that has meant is that whilst all the other countries in the Caribbean have built up expertise in that space by being able to benefit for at least 3-4 years head start, Barbados is now playing catch up with respect to that. And whilst the average citizen may experience through the implementation a slight delay in the delivery of their goods and services, the Customs Department has remained committed to supporting the logistics professionals, because it is important to recognize that the private sector plays a very critical role to the business facilitation element in the country. And therefore, as the Customs Department has upgraded to Assecuda World, it means that the other systems around the ecosystem with respect to trade facilitation also now has to upgrade and improve. And so therefore, what may be regarded as teething problems is essentially just the fact that there's been a shock introduced by a new system, And therefore, everybody else now has to be able to respond to that. And we're committed to seeing these things through, because we simply cannot allow ourselves to be left behind because of the old way of doing things. And we've committed ourselves to supporting the Customs Department. We've re-engaged with the private sector on a consistent basis to work through and improve the facilitation of that. And we will see a number of other reforms coming through with respect to the electronic single window, as well as the Trusted Trader program, which will be accelerated in the coming months. And so the introduction of Assecuda World was just the start with respect to being able to enhance the business facilitation and trade elements for the country. And therefore, these are some of the systems that are necessary, but not necessarily sufficient, because it means the engagement of the stakeholders in order to bring the reforms to the true benefit of the citizens. And that is where we are focused on ensuring then that the government, through its reform process, focuses on what is critical to actually deliver the results for the people by engaging the stakeholders where they need to be engaged, so that the average citizen will see the benefits with respect to these reforms. And we are committed to this process, and we now are moving forward, not just to meet the 6% primary surplus at the end of the year, not just to reduce the debt, which is important, but there is space for an opportunities within certainly the secondary markets in terms of the mobilization of domestic resources, and we are simply creating the space and the opportunities for those things to happen for Barbadians to be able to take advantage of said opportunities. And the government is committed to bringing those opportunities to people, whilst at the same time continue to meet our macroeconomic targets. I'll ask Minister Caddle just to say a few words and then take any questions from you.
Thanks, Minister Straughn. Just to support.
Sorry, they're not as integrated yet.
Yes.
I think the media will have to reform in this aspect.
To engage in some modernization. Just to support what Minister Straughn has been saying in terms of the reforms. As you may know, we have established a doing business subcommittee of cabinet that is chaired by the Prime Minister. And that is supported as well by a doing business subcommittee of the social partnership that we're in the process of establishing with members of the private sector as well as the trade unions. The purpose of this is having put together a reform note that looks at all of the different indicators of the doing business index. It has given us a reform map. So what is that? It means that each ministry, each agency that has a responsibility for some aspect of doing business in Barbados now has to come up with a plan for how it is going to make sure that we perform better, so that the services that are available to domestic and foreign investors mean that we can see growth in the country again. So this supports all of the reforms that Minister Straughn was talking about with respect to customs, electronic single window. It is an entire ecosystem of being able to make sure that we can guarantee growth by achieving some key structural reforms. The fund program has started to create the space for that, the platform for that, but there's some more work to do, not just in terms of the structural benchmarks that are part of the program, but also in terms of all of the reforms that we know we need to get going. The other thing that I'll add is that the issue of resilience and disaster risk and how that factors into what we need to do is becoming more and more key to our work. We, of course, in being able to mobilize domestic and regional savings for people to be able to invest and see returns on their investments, have been looking at how we can partner the targets for resilience and making sure that our economy is climate proof with the fact that people need instruments in which to invest. And so we're doing quite a bit of work on looking at growth and resilience bonds and other financial instruments that are going to allow Barbadians to see returns from their investments. Finally, I also want to pick up on another point that Minister Straughn made in terms of social investment. Now, some of the fiscal space that is created by the work that has been done at the macro level means that we can really drill down and look at what's happening in our communities, what's happening with our young people, make sure that we make the kinds of investments that are going to really provide a platform for growth. We have, over the last 17 months, made sure that we ring-fenced education and health as a platform for people to be able to be productive and to contribute to the inclusive growth that we're targeting. But also as part of that, the Prime Minister has asked the ministry responsible for social care and people empowerment to be able to identify the 500 most vulnerable households in the country, to look at the kinds of investments in households and communities that are going to be able to make the difference to people's lives. And it is the fiscal space that is created by this program that allows us to make those kinds of investments in people's well-being. So this program and the work that we're doing here on the macro side, as Minister Straughn said, is not at all divorced from the kinds of investments in people that we have to be able to make. And the program, being able to stay on track with the program, is allowing us to do that.
So typically what happens after you wrap up a debt restructuring like this is that this gets pretty quickly recognized by international rating agencies. So you can expect when the exercise is wrapped up, which is scheduled to happen in mid-December, upgrades from Standard & Poor's and from Moody's. And that sort of sends a signal to the whole investment community out there, whether it be foreign direct investment or people who are interested in buying bond or debt instruments, that Barbados is doing better and that it is truly open for business. So we think this will mark a very important moment, not just from the perspective of having lower interest rates, having a grace period for 5 years on this external debt, having a significant principal haircut, as we call it, so an immediate reduction of the debt. All of that is very important for the macroeconomic framework, but perhaps even more important is the signal that it sends to the global community.
I wanted Bert to respond first, because I want to locate it in the reality in terms of growth for Barbados. Over the last few years, you would have heard pronouncements about projects to be executed. And the reality is that at the height of our crisis with respect to debt, our interest rates were peaking at almost 13% in terms of debt and debt service. Now, with the debt restructuring, that would be reduced significantly to 6.5%. And the reality is that the downgrades that we experienced over the last few years would have created a significant increase in costs for capital for any company that wanted to undertake investment in Barbados. Certainly, and we should not forget that when we took office last year, we just had about 5 weeks of import cover, and therefore there was questions about the integrity of the exchange rate. So therefore, our ability to conclude this external debt solution will create the space for a new level of financing for projects in Barbados. Confidence, obviously, within the investor community will be enhanced. And as a result, what we will see then is, going forward, a greater improvement with respect to the foreign direct investment in the country. We've spent a lot of time, as Minister Caddle can attest, in terms of ensuring that we prime the land, the ground, so to speak, for this particular moment. So over the last 17 months, whilst we've been focusing on these big macro issues, the actual mechanics of how we are going to unlock, in a sense, the capital space to allow for projects then to be executable. And I think the conclusion of the external debt will create that space where the financing of projects in Barbados, the cost of it will be reduced. Certainly the uncertainty with respect to the integrity of the PEG is no more, and therefore it means that people can invest with confidence that in Barbados, knowing that the fiscal environment is stable over the medium to long term, and so long as we stay on course with respect to the debt to GDP of 60% by 2033, then that allows then for certainty with respect to investment. So I think it's a substantial element in terms of the investment profile for the country.
Just to add, thank you, to what Minister Straughn has said, I think that while the external debt restructuring and its conclusion are going to send some very important and strong signals to the market, I think that those signals were already being sent based on the decision that we took with the domestic and some of the other key and bold reforms that we took, including the convergence of our tax rate, so our corporation tax rate, such that it falls now between 1% and 5.5%. we've seen already that the markets are starting to respond. In April of this year, most of you would have seen that we had a tourism investment forum that focused on the redevelopment of Caddle Bay. Now that aims to add overall, over the next 5 to 7 year period, about 3,000 rooms to the room stock, and 1,500 of those over the next 18 to 24 months. We already have applications before us. The Prime Minister spoke about deals with respect to Paradise, with respect to going forward on the Hyatt, and some major tourism investments that are already taking place. So I think that while the external is continuing to send the right signals, that the market is already responding to the reforms that the country is undertaking, and we're certainly seeing the projects coming forward in terms of renewable energy, in terms of Caddle investment that are going to provide inclusive growth and jobs for Barbadians.
In terms of we know the ultimate target is debt to GDP ratio of 60%. Can you tell us what is the current debt to GDP ratio, and after the external restructuring, how much do you anticipate that will go down to?
The current rate is 118% debt to GDP. Obviously, we're anticipating that there will be a successful take-up with respect to the external offer, and only at that stage we'll be able to tell you definitively what the ratio would be. But we anticipate that with that success, we will be well on our way to reaching at least as close to 100%, and then we'll be thereafter with the continued reforms, then we will see the gradual reduction with respect to the debt. Now, just bear in mind that we are still in a grace period right now with respect to a lot of the principal repayment, amortization. And so therefore, after the program, we'll start to see repayments with respect to principal, and therefore you will then start to see a further deceleration in terms of a decrease, in terms of the debt to GDP.
Yes.
Mr. Straughn, we spoke a lot about the social impact that we can expect from carrying out the transformation. But two of the main areas that I know residents are very concerned about, the garbage collection and the public transportation.
Yes.
What update can you give us in terms of?
Well, as you're aware, we introduced the garbage and sewage contribution last year as part of the initial reforms for the financing of the SSA. The SSA has been in the process, and during that time we acquired 7 trucks last year. 12 additional trucks have been ordered and manufactured and in the process of being concluded, and should be here, knock on wood, before the end of the year. Now, the reality is that we live in a world now where not much inventory is kept. And therefore, as we go through a process of refinancing, and I want to say that as we have introduced that in order to acquire trucks, the rebuilding of the fleet of the SSA is a priority. It remains a priority. The SSA currently is spending quite a bit of money on repairing the existing fleet whilst we acquire additional trucks. And therefore, we found ourselves in a situation, for example, where the chassis are manufactured in China, shipped to the United States, and you know that there's a little issue there. And so we've been impacted in a sense by the global environment, and therefore the protracted nature with respect to being able to get the trucks here, that's the reality of the circumstances that we're living in. But the fleet of the SSA is going to be rebuilt. It will take some time to do so. At the appropriate time, the minister will advise the country in terms of the other plans that are in train to increase the fleet. But the payment of the GSC is critical to the financing of the SSA. And again, I say to citizens that there will be an improvement in the quality with respect to the service of the SSA. In part, one is related to fleet replacement and management of that, and I think that's something that certainly going into 2020, we will see an improvement with respect to that. As relates to the Transport Board, I know that the board is in the process of acquiring 50 buses. The tendering arrangement is being completed at the moment, and we anticipate that sometime in the middle of next year we should be able to see those buses coming onto the roads of Barbados. But the Ministry of Transport and Works and Maintenance will advise and keep the country up to date with respect to those details. And the reality is that a lot of the reforms within both, well, certainly within the transportation environment in Barbados, the ministry will speak more on that at the appropriate time. But we are relooking everything that we do with respect to business in Barbados, and that includes logistics and transportation is a critical part of that, because at the end of the day, if you can't move people or you can't move goods, move information, move garbage, then it means the country simply would be in gridlock. So we're literally looking at all of the processes that impact the logistics of the country, because that is critical to being able to achieve any meaningful or sustainable growth. So I hope that answers your question.
I want to add on the buses, if I can, Minister Straughn, that while buses are in the process of being ordered,
Sorry.
thanks, that the Transport Board has also been able to increase the number of current vehicles in operation on a daily basis, just based on improved maintenance to the existing fleet. So I mean, the chairman is usually able to say on a day-to-day basis how many buses are in operation. But I believe that having moved from in the area of 40 or so,
It was 30 actually.
30 or so, which is even worse, 17 months ago, to be up to, on average, in the area of 70 operational buses from the current fleet is a significant improvement, even while we wait for these buses to be ordered. Now, obviously, we know that more buses are required and more reforms to public transport are required. But I want to say that even while we're waiting for those buses, that the Transport Board is certainly not sitting idly by. They're doing all they can in terms of regular maintenance to be able to make sure that the current fleet is operational as far as possible. The other quick thing I wanted to add, and Minister Straughn tends to be a little bit modest, so I'll help him if he doesn't want to mention the fact that having come to 118% after the external debt restructuring, and we anticipate may go, I think, maybe to 114 when it's all told, this is down, if we count arrears, from over 170% debt to GDP in the area of 176. So it is, there's a reason that we count arrears, because as Minister Straughn said earlier, it was those arrears or the lack of repayment that was really stifling the country's capacity to grow. But I just want people to be aware of where we have come from through the restructuring, and the fact that while 118 may seem significant in the global scheme of things, having come from 176, that is certainly in no small feat in 17 months.
Well, one of the key reforms that needs to be looked at, and I know that CAIPO is one such area in terms of the business facilitation element that is critical. Structurally, our ability to create the space for people to form businesses and for them to get the kind of business intelligence that's required in a 21st century environment is critical. And I think certainly the reform of the CAIPO, as well as the other associated services that they can provide, is critical for improving the business environment. And so that is a key reform that, outside of the main finance reforms that are required, that we believe in the context of the doing business, as Minister Caddle would have mentioned before, is absolutely vital with respect to being able to do business in Barbados. The government has been, we've met so many times with the social partnership on a whole range of matters, simply to ensure that as we move forward, the urgency is understood by all the stakeholders, so that we can keep everybody on side with respect to the pace of implementation, because we are by no means out of the hole. so to speak, and therefore our ability as a country to be on the track it is vital that we implement the reforms as quickly as we could possibly implement them. And that is why we've engaged so aggressively on the technical assistance provided not just by the fund but and the World Bank and others, because whilst the staff of the government is busy in a sense trying to implement what is needed to be done, we also need additional assistance in terms of being able to drive those additional reforms as well. And therefore, our capacity to respond means that we need to be able to walk and chew gum and whistle and do all kinds of things at the same time, which is why we've sought to engage these social partnerships so aggressively, because we do need the government, the people of Barbados, we do need every bit of help that we can get. And so our focus in terms of how we do things is absolutely critical, and that's why the Prime Minister has been so strident in terms of building the consensus before you move forward. And whilst we may not always agree in terms of in the context of the social partnership on every single issue, I think in the context of what is required to execute the mission, that confidence is still there, and therefore we intend to move forward with respect to the reforms, still in that consensus building fashion. But the reality is that the introduction of technology, the way that we're doing things in government, the way that the private sector is doing things, and one of the other softer reforms which hasn't been mentioned is that we've been working on the digital payment solution with respect to the country. Now, that too is critical because the government is still printing a lot of checks for a whole host of reasons, and that takes time, it takes effort, it takes reconciliation, it takes paper, it takes effort for somebody to walk in and sign that they received it, go and deposit on the bank, wait 3 days, all of these things, which is time, is money. And therefore, we are very focused on what is required to achieve growth. And that's why we've been pushing on multiple fronts to be able to keep everybody on side so that we can do all of these things almost simultaneously. It's not easy. It's not easy, but we've committed ourselves to being able to do that, to give the citizens the best chance to see the growth that we know will come.
In terms of, I think the question was linking the work on the reforms with the capacity to create jobs. And I think that what we have to do is to use every reform process at our disposal to be able to contribute to that. And I'll tell you what I mean. In January of this year, we passed new town planning legislation. We're also looking at a revised fiscal incentives regime. Through both of those tools, we are able to create a framework for the amount, the number, and the kinds of jobs that we want to see in the economy. So, for example, a key part of our consideration with respect to duties and waivers and concessions and how we look at that, and bearing in mind that we now have an extremely low corporation tax, the lowest non-zero OECD compliant tax rate in the world. So the space for additional concessions, you would understand, is probably not as great, especially in the context of a fund program. But a part of the consideration, and we're really looking at 3 key things. One has to do with foreign exchange earning capacity of the investment. So this is as a basis for deciding an incentives package. 2, what is the number of decent jobs that are going to be created for Barbadians? And with respect to this, we are also conscious of the fact that if an investment, in particular hotel development, is being established in an area that requires urban regeneration, so we're talking about the entire urban corridor in Barbados, including Bridgetown, that those people in those communities should be well served in terms of access to jobs. So foreign exchange earning capacity to create decent work for Barbadians, and quite frankly, how committed the project is to start and completion date. For us, growth now is of more value than growth later. So if we have an investment or an investor that is willing to commit and to say when that start date is going to be and to make sure that we are on track in terms of its completion, then that is also a part of the three-step approach in terms of considering an incentives regime. So along with actually having the investments here on the ground to be able to create jobs for Barbadians, it's also in terms of how we use the tools at our disposal, whether it is the planning obligations that attach to planning applications, or it is how we use the fiscal incentives regime to make sure that investors are also able to contribute in a conscientious and a socially conscious way to the development of Barbados.
Anyone wants to have this opportunity where everyone is
Well, we targeted to try to clear the arrears over the first 2 years to accelerate and put more cash into the economy. So, for example, the Revenue Authority, just to give an example in terms of personal income tax, over the first year, 2011, 12, and 13, personal income tax arrears would have been repaid. And so during this second year, we will focus on 14, 15, and 16. And as I've said in Parliament and I've said to people, if there are persons who were owed tax refunds for those periods and haven't yet seen their refunds, then just simply contact the Revenue Authority and we'll ensure that is processed. In terms of VAT and some of the larger ones, what we started to do, as you could imagine, I'd want to really give an appreciation for the fact that whilst the government owed a lot of people monies, we had to go through a process of reconciliation to ensure that before we pay, that it was actually something that was actually due and owing to persons. But we've been able to settle that, and some of the large VAT refunds started paying on a monthly basis from April this year, because some person would have chosen to initially to get the Series F bonds to be able to pay on a monthly basis to work that down. So from April 1st, persons with the VAT refunds would have been receiving those monthly payments to pay the arrears prior to September 1st of last year. And so that is a continuing process with respect to being able to clear down those arrears. And again, that speaks to our ability to pay down, in a sense, the total debt, including arrears, and that is something that we've planned through the program. So accept that the government doesn't have all the revenue on April 1st to execute its mandate. We have to go out and raise the revenue. There's activity that needs to take place in order to do that. And so therefore the surpluses, as well as the other financing that we are getting, allows us to be able to including the debt restructuring, allows us to be able to help repay those arrears. But it's something that has to be managed. And so therefore, given the cash flow of government, we've committed ourselves under the program to paying those down. And therefore, I can commit to giving you a more precise answer with respect to where we are in terms of how much we've paid since we started the program. But it's something that is being programmed in the process that month after month, these arrears will be repaid. We focus on those individuals, especially on the personal income tax in the first 2 years specifically, because as you could imagine, persons were waiting 2011, 12, 13, and the reality is that households require those monies, I suppose, much more urgently in the context of the status in terms of the debt of households. And so we focus on ensuring that individuals, their repayments are accelerated. Whilst obviously once businesses have entered into the arrangement with the BRA under those agreements, then obviously it means that once we deliver, then they have certainty with respect to their financial institutions in terms of what financing they may offer the private sector, and therefore that is what allows the confidence then to be rebuilt as far as the business community is concerned. But there has been, in a sense, some issues with reconciliation in some instances, and we've worked to sort those out as quickly as we can, so such that we're able to accelerate those payments. So as those issues arise, we just, given that they're already in the stock, just to ensure that it's done, then we take that into consideration with respect to being able to execute the payments for those persons.
Yes, and one more question.
Sure.
If you could give us an if you could give us an update as it relates to the online tax, the
Mm.
the program, but with what's happening first tomorrow, so what will happen?
With respect to the online implementation, the BRA is in the process of finalizing with some of the larger online retailers, and we anticipate that please don't hold me to this, but we anticipate that we should be in a position to have that implemented by the beginning of next year. It's a process that will allow us to build out the space gradually. It's taken longer than we anticipated, but we should be in a position to have that started to roll out in January of 2020. As it relates to crime, now all of what we are doing in terms of the macroeconomy essentially can all go to naught if we don't get a stronger handle with respect to the crime situation. Now, the AG and the resources that we've been able to put at the disposal of the Royal Barbados Police Force, we've also been able to strengthen, in a sense, a lot of the operations at the port as it relates to security. In part, some of the delay that might have been experienced at the port was simply because we've increased the scanning requirement at the port. You would recall that when we came to office, just about 6% of the cargo coming through the port was being scanned. And so therefore, clearly we had to respond to ensure that the security at the border, and that's why on the one hand, customs has a security function, a revenue function, as well as a business facilitation function. And so therefore, we've had to beef that up in order to ensure that what has been coming in is stemmed, so that we can then deal with what we have on land. And I know that the entire security apparatus has been working reasonably effectively, and you would have seen a decline in those most violent activities from the beginning of the year. Of course, we cannot rest on the fact that is the case. Now, the economy also plays a critical part in being able to provide opportunities for persons, and therefore we have responded with respect to the creation of not just the First Jobs Initiative, but also the Youth Advance Corps to give young people an opportunity to move away from those options. And we are working as hard as we can to accelerate the capacity within those spaces in order to help provide a buffer and an alternative for persons who may wish to go in that direction. The reality is that we have been training about 7,000 less persons now than we were 10 years ago. And I'm talking about across the university, BCC, and SJPP, and that entire apparatus for providing tertiary education. And so therefore, we are accelerating those opportunities that will actively engage young men and women in the country in order to be able to become productive citizens, as opposed to creating opportunities for criminal activity. And so it is options, and we are committed, as I mentioned earlier. Our social interventions now are just as important as the macro picture that we are painting here. And therefore, the government has committed itself to being able to intervene as quickly as we can with respect to giving young people opportunities to move in a different direction. So that is a very, very important element in terms of the plan, because unless young people can leave school, get into the workforce, become productive citizens, then growth simply will not accelerate in the way that we know that it will. And the truth is that it is those young people demanding goods and services that provides the impetus, in a sense, for the real part of the economy. And so it is critical that we provide the space. We've reintroduced the tertiary tuition at the University of the West Indies as one part. We are putting in those First Jobs Initiatives as well as the Youth Advance Corps to be able to help move a lot of those persons who left school, the National Training Initiative as well, to be able to capture those young people who simply did not have any opportunities really to get into the workforce in a meaningful way over the last few years. And so that is a critical part in terms of the response to being able to provide options for young people to move away from crime. Okay? So thank you very much. And
Thank you.
for coming, and I want to thank you, sir, for
Thank
your
you.
work.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
pleasure.